She was humiliated for marrying a poor man until they found out who he was. What happens when a woman gives her heart to someone her family considers unworthy? When even bread is met with reproach? You won't believe what silenced them, and how she changed everything just by saying her name. Clara got up early, even when she didn't have to. It was easier that way. The house was still quiet in the morning. It wasn't breathing reproaches yet, wasn't grinding its teeth with memories. Only the warm air, damp from the night's moisture, and the rhythmic breathing of the old stove. On the table was an old wooden board with cuts like scars. On it was a lump of dough which she kneaded slowly, with effort, as if it depended on it whether the day would be quieter. In the corner was a radio that had long since fallen silent. Outside the window was nothing but a field. Even the birds were silent. Only the creaking of a rope on a well somewhere behind the fence could be heard. This sound used to frighten her, but now it had become familiar, like everything else in this house. She spread egg on a loaf of bread and put it in the oven. Herbal tea was already cooling on the stove. Thomas loved it with yarrow. He said it helped his stomach. Clara always remembered what people liked, but hardly anyone was interested in what she liked. Footsteps, long, limping. It was her mother-in-law, Lucia. The house seemed to shudder. The stove creaked in response like an old man. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and turned to face her mother-in-law, as if on stage, only this scene was repeated every day. "Baking bread again?" Her mother-in-law's voice cut like a poorly sharpened knife. "Who's going to buy the flour? Or do you think everything in this house grows by itself? Like you did?" Clara remained silent. Not because she was afraid. She simply knew that if she answered, it would be worse. And if she remained silent, it would be the same as always. At least that was predictable. Her mother-in-law approached the table, glanced at the cup, snorted, took a piece of yesterday's bread, and left. No good morning or how did you sleep? Only the creak of the door and the smell of bay leaves, which for some reason suddenly became repulsive. She stood there with her hands in the dough, as if she were not a person but a piece of furniture. A handkerchief hung by the window, the one Clara had embroidered before her wedding. There were flowers on it, bright, childlike. Now they had faded. Like her, probably. Too soon. The second door slammed in the hallway. Thomas's younger sister, Elena, had returned. She came in and threw her bag, as always, right into the bowl of apples. She glanced into the kitchen and squinted. "Oh, the morning has begun with a performance of domestic servants. You've got real talent, Clara. Only who needs it? And laughter. Clear, light, like a slap in the face." Clara nodded, as if she agreed, although inside it felt like a knife had been thrust into her chest, because it wasn't laughter. It was the end. Another one. Somewhere there, in her inner diary of pain. She turned back to the bread. It no longer smelled fresh, but of despair. She suddenly felt nauseous, but she swallowed. Not the bread, her tears. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Lunch was late as usual. Some had no appetite, some chewed mechanically, some fiddled with their phones, although no one here acknowledged phones. Too city a habit. Only the clatter of forks, smacking lips, and the occasional whimper of an old dog under the table could be heard. Clara sat on the edge, almost on a chair without a back, like an uninvited guest. The younger one, Elena, came in dressed up again. She was wearing a skirt above the knee and cherry-colored lipstick. She spoke quickly, interrupted, and joked as if she were in a cafe with her friends. Then she suddenly fell silent, staring at Clara. She took a sip of water and, as if in passing, said, "You've always been too soft. That's why they walk all over you." No accusation, no venom, just a statement of fact. But the blow was more accurate than if she had shouted. The fork froze in her hand. Even Thomas looked up but quickly looked away. Clara didn't answer. She had already learned not to justify herself. But something inside her trembled. Not because of the words. Because she knew that there was truth in those words. Partial, but accurate. She suddenly remembered how, as a child, she had found a wounded bird, hidden it in the closet, carried water to it in a thimble, and fed it bread. The bird died 3 days later. Her mother had said, "You take everything too seriously. The world isn't for people like you." And now here she was doing the same thing. Only it wasn't her mother anymore. It was a stranger. But the verdict was the same. She stared at the white tablecloth, at the beetroot stains, at the crack in the wall, at the shadows under her husband's eyes. And she thought, what if it's all true? What if she really is soft? But why has that suddenly become a sin? After lunch, everyone left. Some went about their business. Others simply didn't want to sit there. Clara cleared the table without saying a word. She just folded the forks neatly, like in a hotel. As if tidying the table could tidy up her life. In an old chest of drawers, she found a photograph. A wedding photo. The edges were yellowed, the faces faded. She was in a dress. Thomas was in an old jacket. Back then, it seemed like happiness. Now, it was as if someone else was looking out of the photo. The photo fell. She didn't pick it up. She just sat down next to it, her back against the wall, and suddenly she realized she wasn't in pain. She felt empty. And that was worse. She closed her eyes. Her memory helpfully brought back her mother's voice. "You will suffer, but quietly, nicely, like a woman." And again, without drama, without hysterics, just like instructions for life. Clara knew that something was breaking. Slowly, without a sound, like rust. Only instead of iron, it was her heart. It wasn't a quarrel, it was something more. It was as if the house was telling her, "You don't belong here. You're kind. And they don't keep kind people here." And she looked at the ceiling and thought, maybe it's true. Maybe it's enough. What followed would turn everything upside down. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see how the hero put everyone in their place. The morning began the same way. Always. No holidays, no days off. First the kettle, then the dough, then a long list of chores that no one wrote down, but everyone expected to be done. Even the dog seemed to have accepted the routine as normal, lying down at the door so as not to be noticed. Clara was the first to wake up and the last to fall asleep. She didn't work, if you count work as only what you get paid for. But if someone had kept track of the laundry, watering the plants, cooking, collecting eggs, cleaning the bathroom mirror, treating Lucia's endless something with her back, there wouldn't have been enough lines on her schedule. She and Thomas lived as neighbors. He came home late, not drunk, not angry, just tired. He would sit down at the table, eat his dinner in silence without looking up once. Then he would lie down on the sofa and turn on the old radio, which picked up only static and rare snippets of news. She would sometimes sit down next to him, hoping for a word. Just one. But he usually just sighed and said, "Where's the salt?" And that was it, until the next morning. Elena came once a week, always unexpectedly, always laughing and smelling of perfume that stung her eyes. She was younger, cheerful, free. She studied in the city and sometimes boasted that she had met someone promising, but nothing serious. She loved to recall how Clara had thrown herself into poverty by marrying Thomas. "Admit it," she said once in the kitchen. "You could have chosen someone smart, with a car." And you chose, what? A sad man with a pickaxe? Clara didn't answer. She had long since stopped defending her choice, because no one listened. And she didn't know how to shout. Lucia, her mother-in-law, lived in her own room but ran the house with the precision of a sergeant. She always had a cold, aching bones, dizziness, or an uneasy heart, and all of this required Clara's attention. Sometimes it seemed that the old woman fed on attention rather than food, and every take out the water, pick up the pillow, be quiet for a moment, I have a migraine, sounded like a challenge. Sometimes Clara tried to speak, to start a conversation with Thomas. Are you happy? Or, maybe we could go somewhere? But he either didn't hear her or looked at her as if she were asking for the impossible. Or maybe he just didn't know what to say. She had no friends here. The people she went to school with were still in town, but after she got married, it was all, well, you're in the country now. She sometimes wrote to her sister, but she lived abroad and mostly talked about herself. About her husband, about renovations, about the mortgage, neighbors. Some were polite but cold. Some were curious but sarcastic. Some were silent, as if Clara had always been a shadow here. Thomas's wife. Not a person. And yet she tried. From morning till night, everything in order. Wash the floor, peel the potatoes, visit the neighbor's grandmother, who can't hear anything but is always waiting. Make a tablecloth out of an old sheet. Sew a jacket that no one wears. No one asked her to, but she did it, because otherwise it felt like she didn't exist. Sometimes in the evening, when everyone had left, she would go to the mirror. She would stare at it for a long time. And she would think, how many years have I been here? And how many inside myself? But the mirror didn't care. It only showed her face, not the emptiness inside. She wanted a kind word. At least a glance that didn't contain reproach or indifference. But this house seemed to live by its own rules. It was not customary to say, I love you here. Even thank you sounded like a debt. And once Lucia, running past, threw at her, You are a daughter-in-law, not a daughter. Don't forget. And then Clara understood. Even if she carried the whole house on her shoulders, they would not accept her. Because she was the one who came with empty hands. The day was like any other. Nothing foreshadowed anything. She baked cabbage pies, not because it was a holiday, but simply because the cabbage had started to sour. Thomas left early without saying goodbye. He just slammed the door, knocking the key hook off the wall. Clara silently picked it up and screwed it back on, as always. Lucia grumbled from her room that the house smelled like poverty. Elena had turned on the music loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear that morning. Then she went out for a smoke. She was wearing a dress that she wouldn't even wear to the market. Clara went to the stove and checked the oven. The pies were browning nicely. Suddenly, there was a knock at the gate. She didn't go right away. She waited. Someone knocked again, a little more insistently. A man was standing on the doorstep. His jacket was wrinkled, his face tired, and he was holding an envelope. For Clara Del Val? He asked without looking up. That's me, she said. He handed her the letter without even waiting for a thank you and walked away. Clara stood there with the paper in her hand. The envelope was thick and embossed. It didn't look like a regular bill or greeting card. The name was written by hand. Her fingers trembled involuntarily. The paper felt hot. She went inside and put the envelope on the table. She didn't open it. She just stood there, watching as if steam were rising from it. The kettle boiled. Lucia called out something about socks. The pies began to burn. But she didn't move. It was as if something unknown had entered the house with that letter. Elena saw the envelope first. She glanced over her shoulder. What's that? Court? Debts? Or maybe they're finally looking for you for murdering kindness. Clara smiled dryly, silently. She didn't answer. She just took the letter and went to her bedroom. She sat down on the bed. The room was cold. Even in summer, there was a draft here. It was as if the walls didn't want to warm her. She opened it. Carefully, along the fold. She took out the sheet of paper. At first, the words danced around. Then they formed lines. With each paragraph, her heart beat slower. The words were simple, emotionless. But the meaning was heavy, like a blow, like a sentence. No, not a sentence. Not right away. But something that would change everything. She read it again, then again. Her hands trembled. She went out into the hallway. It was quiet. She put the letter on the sideboard. She put away the pies. One was missing. Someone had already eaten it. "What was that?" Lucia asked from behind her. "Just a piece of paper," Clara replied. But inside she knew it wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a boundary. Once crossed, there was no turning back. The nights in that house were always strange, as if something was lurking. Even the crickets behind the fence chirped uncertainly. Water dripped from the ceiling. No one knew where it was coming from. Clara lay on her side, motionless. Thomas breathed heavily, turned away toward the wall. There was something stubborn in his breathing, as if he were sleeping out of spite. She hid the letter under her pillow, and it felt as if it were burning. With words, memories, things she could no longer ignore. It seemed that if she spoke now, everything around her would crack. Not just the walls, everything. The very air itself. In the morning, she sat in the kitchen, stirring semolina porridge for Lucia. She watched the milk rise, almost boil over. She wanted it to boil over. She wanted everything to boil over, even herself. "Well, did you at least open it?" Elina asked, walking in barefoot, as if she were at a resort hotel. "Or are you going to pray to it until you're old?" "I read it," Clara replied quietly. Elina was surprised. She raised an eyebrow. Then she sat down, staring intently. "Well, what's in it? Or are you going to swallow it all again and pretend that life is just a pie recipe?" Clara didn't answer. She just stood up, poured some tea, put it in front of Elina. She grimaced. "Black without sugar? Am I a monk or something?" "You're a guest," Clara said calmly, "and the tea is free." Elina laughed, but somehow uncertainly, for the first time. After lunch, Clara was left alone. Lucia was asleep. Thomas had gone to the barn. Elina had left. In the house there were only footsteps, the wind, and paper. She took out the letter again. She read it, word for word. And she thought, what if I tell them, right now, at the table? Let them know. But then another thought followed. What if they don't believe me? What if they get angry? What if Thomas just leaves? She felt her hands grow cold. It was as if her whole body had frozen at the mere thought of speaking. She used to think that her fear was that she wouldn't be heard. Now she was afraid that they would hear her, and everything would change. Clara went to the mirror. She looked into her own eyes. She smiled. It was a bitter smile. As Lucia would have said, the smile of a woman who has been rejected. "Well, soul," she whispered, "how long are you going to remain silent?" There was no answer, only her reflection. Tired, but not broken, not yet. She returned to the kitchen, sat down, took out the letter, placed it on the table. Thomas entered, glanced at it, walked past, didn't ask, didn't even stop, just threw over his shoulder, "The soup isn't salty." and disappeared. And Clara sat there, with the letter, with the salt, with a world she could no longer bear. Inside, everything was screaming, "Let them know! Let there be something real!" But her lips remained silent, for now. The evening came heavy as a wet sheet. Thomas didn't come home on time. Lucia complained of heart palpitations but didn't take her pills. Elena sent a short message. "I'm at a friend's house. Don't wait." As if anyone was waiting for her. Clara stood at the window. Behind the glass, there was nothing. Only twilight and a crooked shed. The house creaked like an old man who couldn't believe he had lived to see another day. She held the letter in her hand. It was thick like a rock. It was as if the weight of her silence had been absorbed into the paper. When Thomas finally arrived, not late, but not on time, he was tired, wearing a dirty shirt, with a look on his face that said only one thing: "Don't touch me." He threw his boots at the door and walked past without looking at her. "I left you some food," she said quietly. He didn't answer. He just muttered something that sounded like thanks, or salt. She couldn't tell. The kitchen was warm and smelled of dill and sour milk. He sat down and started eating. She came over and sat down opposite him. She slowly placed the letter on the table. Face up. Not a word, just a gesture. Thomas ate without looking up. Only when he had finished did he raise his eyes. He glanced at the letter, then at her, and asked, "Should I?" She looked at him, quietly, not defiantly, wearily, but no longer submissively. "Yes," she said. He nodded and got up, left, leaving his plate empty, as if he had already eaten everything he could, and owed nothing more. She remained seated. Her heart beat steadily, not fast, not anxiously, just differently, as if something inside her had clicked into place. It wasn't a change yet, but she wasn't the same Clara anymore. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the porch, covered with an old blanket. The wind played with her hair. A dog howled somewhere. A fence creaked somewhere. She held the letter in her hand and read it again. And suddenly she began to read aloud, in a whisper, to herself. Like a prayer. But it was no longer a request. It was a statement. In the morning, she didn't bake bread, for the first time. She got up, got dressed, calmly, put on a scarf, opened the closet, took out an old bag, put only the most necessary things in it, not clothes, documents, photos, a letter. Lucia looked at her from the sofa. She narrowed her eyes. "Where are you going?" "Don't worry," said Clara. "I'll be back. Here's my teapot." "You're not going to put on another show, are you?" Clara smiled, toothless but dignified. "No, I'm just tired of acting." She left. No tears, no shouting. She walked quietly and closed the door behind her, not with a slam, but with effort, as if it were the last time, or the first. Old Ramiro's house stood on the edge of the village, as if accidentally left on the map. The roof was full of holes, and the fence was made of 3 planks to which he had attached a bell so he could hear when someone came in. He let Clara stay with him. No strings attached, no questions asked. He simply said, "There hasn't been a woman in this house for a long time. Maybe the walls will come to life." The room smelled of dust, dried herbs, and something strangely sweet. In the corner stood a pot-bellied chest of drawers containing letters from half a century ago and a photograph of a girl with eyes like Clara's. She hardly spoke during the first few days. She just washed the floors, cooked soup, and mended curtains. Ramiro watched her and nodded occasionally. It was as if he saw something in her that she herself did not yet understand. On the third evening, he came out onto the porch with 2 mugs of tea and said, "I've never understood women who don't talk, but maybe they're right." Clara took a mug and sat down next to him. The evening was warm, but the air was crisp. "Do you understand those who talk?" He smiled. He had few teeth, but his gaze was clear. No one understands them. They don't understand themselves or others, but they still talk. They sat in silence. Then he added, "I was married. Once. She left. And I stayed. Because it was my home, not hers." "I think," said Clara, "I stayed too long." "And the house stopped being mine, even though I never left." He said nothing. He just nodded. And that nod was warmer than any words she had heard in recent years. The next day, she went to the store. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't shopping for others. She just wanted to buy some apples and soap. At the checkout, she met Sophia. She was younger, with clear eyes and strong hands. She lived in the house next door. She was a widow. People said her husband had died in a construction accident, and since then, she had become harsh. Sophia looked at Clara intently, without pity. "Are you with Ramiro now?" she asked. "Temporarily," Clara replied. "Who lives with us permanently?" They walked together, in silence. Then Clara couldn't hold back. "I don't know if I did the right thing." "Of course not," Sophia replied, "because the right thing is what's convenient for everyone. And for the first time, you've made it convenient for yourself." At that moment, Clara suddenly realized she was no longer alone. She wasn't saved. She wasn't accepted. But someone was walking beside her, at her own pace, without pressure. And that was already a breath of fresh air. Life in Ramiro's house was slow, too slow, as if on purpose. At first, Clara tried to find a routine. She got up at dawn, cooked porridge, swept the floor, waited for someone to come in and tell her she was doing everything wrong. But no one came in, and no one corrected her. She caught herself not knowing what to do with this silence. It wasn't humiliating or oppressive. It just was. No strings attached, no expectations. The freedom she had dreamed of turned out to be frightening. Like a room without walls, you can go wherever you want, but where does it end? Ramiro was nearby, but he didn't interfere. Sometimes he told stories, how he fought in the war, how he was once bitten by a rooster, how he loved a woman who left him for a pharmacist. Clara listened like a child listening to an old fairy tale, knowing that the ending would be sad, but hoping anyway. She started going out into the garden. She planted things, just for the sake of it, without any purpose. She weeded the mint. She put a cup on a stump. She watched the butterflies land on the leaves. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself not to be needed. Sophia came often. At first she had excuses. Salt, a knife, a book. Then she just came. They sat on a bench and talked about everything and nothing. Clara learned that Sophia had dreamed of opening a sewing workshop, but everyone said that no one in the village needs it. She learned that Sophia had had a miscarriage, that she had hated her body for many years, and then just stopped. "I decided," said Sophia, "that my body is my home, and even if it's empty, I'll still sweep it." Clara laughed, bitterly, but sincerely. Her home, her body, had served everyone but her for so many years. They baked a pie with sour apples. It turned out crooked but tasty. They laughed when the dough stuck to the floor. Sophia said, "It turns out you have hands for more than just trays and pots." And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt like a woman, not a function, not a role, but a living person. But beneath all this warm dust of freedom lay a feeling of unease, as if someone was watching. as if Lucia and Thomas's house was still breathing down her neck, as if at any moment the door could swing open and it would all disappear. One evening, returning from the river, she noticed a black car outside the house. Her heart skipped a beat. But it wasn't a threat. It was just Ramiro calling the doctor. High blood pressure, an old ulcer, nothing serious. But the fear had already settled under her skin. Sophia saw it. "Aren't you afraid they'll come?" she asked. "I'm afraid they won't," Clara replied, "because then I know for sure that no one needs me." Sophia took her hand. "Sometimes to be needed, you have to be yourself first." That night, Clara didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, which had no cracks. And she thought, what if this is happiness when there are no cracks? But in life, they always appear. And the question is not how to avoid them. The question is whether you yourself will become the crack through which everything slips away. The day began calmly, too calmly. A light wind blew dust across the yard. Ramiro the dog barked listlessly at the sparrows, and the grass rustled as if whispering, "Live quietly." Clara threw on a shawl, went out to the well, and filled a bucket. And suddenly, a bell. Hollow, short, like a stranger's voice in a familiar dream. Thomas was standing at the gate. He had lost weight. Or maybe he was just slouching. In his hand was the same shirt she had ironed 1,000 times. His eyes were the same, but without depth. He looked like a man who had come not for forgiveness, but for a fact. "May I come in?" he asked. "You're already here," said Clara. They sat on the bench. They were silent. Then he said, "Mom is sick." She nodded. "I know. She asked about you." "What did you say?" He shrugged, as if he were wearing stones instead of a shirt. "That you left, because you were tired." She looked at his face. At that familiar face that had been so close for so many years, and yet all that time so far away. "Is that all you understood?" He looked away. He placed a folded piece of paper on his knees. The letter. The one she had written. "I read it." Clara froze. "It's too late." "I know," he said, "but I came anyway." Silence fell again. Not air. Weight. He stood up, without coming closer, without asking for anything, just standing there, as if waiting for her to say, "Come back." But she didn't. He left, and she stayed. She sat there, motionless, until it got dark, until the last light disappeared from the fence. Inside, nothing. No tears, no anger, no relief. Only the knowledge that everything was different now. It was the moment when the past came back and couldn't stay. After Thomas's visit, something changed in the village. Not loudly, not immediately. People just started looking longer. They stopped smiling in the shop. The neighbor on the corner no longer nodded when she passed by. It was as if someone somewhere had whispered the right word, and now Clara was once again the one who left. Ramiro didn't ask any questions, but he began to leave his room less often. It was as if he sensed that she was no longer seeking silence. She was trying not to drown in it. Sophia came in the evening. She sat down without saying a word, just put a jar of jam on the table. Clara watched the dark mass quivering inside the glass. "Was he here?" Sophia asked quietly. Clara nodded. "Did he read the letter?" Clara nodded again, but the words wouldn't come out. Her throat felt like a clenched fist. "What did he say?" "Nothing. He just left." Sophia looked at her for a long time. Then she exhaled. "Sometimes silence hurts more than the truth, because at least there's something alive in the truth. In silence, there's only emptiness." Since then, Clara heard people talking about her more and more often. Directly, without hiding. At the pharmacy, it's your own fault. At the market, she took a husband and left him. Someone once asked her directly, "Who are you now? What is a woman without a man?" She didn't answer. She just turned away. But inside she was burning. Not with anger, with humiliation, because once again, she was the subject of conversation. But not a voice. The letter was now lying in her dresser drawer. She didn't open it. She knew it by heart. Every line. Like a sentence, or maybe like a chance that was already too late. Ramiro once said, "Leaving is hard, but it's even harder not to go back to a place where no one expects anything from you." She nodded. And she added, "And the hardest thing is to realize that you don't expect anything anymore either." Sophia stopped by less and less often. She was having money problems. She had to work more. Clara understood, and she wasn't offended. But the house was empty again. Cold. Like before. Everything new suddenly became foreign, and the old became closer. But not like home. More like a shadow that follows you even when you run toward the light. She caught herself waiting. For what, she didn't know. An answer? A letter? Thomas? Or herself? But all that came was silence. And emptiness. No longer comforting, but suffocating. She woke up in the middle of the night. Not from a sound, but from the absence of sound. Ramiro's house usually lived. The floor creaked, the shutters squeaked, a dog sighed somewhere. But now, nothing. As if everything inside had stopped, even breathing. Clara sat down on the bed. The letter was under the pillow. She always knew where it was, even with her eyes closed. She went out onto the porch. The wind was sticky and damp. The air was warm. She sat down on the steps and pressed her handkerchief to her chest. She stared into the darkness. There was nothing there. No road. No answer. No end. She didn't notice the photograph on her knees. It was old and faded. A wedding photo. Thomas was wearing a suit that looked foreign to him. She was wearing a dress she had sewn herself. Her eyes still believed back then. Now those eyes were looking up, from the past, and they didn't recognize her. She crumpled the photo. She clenched her fist, until it hurt. Then she slowly opened her fist. The paper was crumpled but not torn, just like her. There was nothing else inside. No desire to speak, no hope, not even pain. That had gone first. Only fatigue remained, deep, like a well with no bottom. In the morning, she didn't get up. She just lay there. An hour passed. 2. A day. Ramiro knocked. Then again. Then he came in. He looked at her. He left. He brought water. He left it there. Nothing else. She lay there, motionless. The room was dark. Even when the sun was shining through the window, she didn't open the curtains. She no longer cared what day it was, whether there was any bread, whether anyone would come. A letter fell to the floor. She didn't pick it up. A photograph lay nearby, worn, as if 100 hands had touched it, but only one had, hers. Late in the evening, Ramiro came in. He sat down next to her. He said, "I'll bury the dog. She's old. She can't get up anymore." Clara nodded, but inside nothing stirred. No pity, no response. Only the thought. Even she left first. At some point she heard herself whispering. Not a prayer, not a request, just words, different ones, random ones, as if she was trying to remember what her voice sounded like. But the voice was foreign. Even it was gone. The night dragged on like a rag clenched between wet fingers. The wind blew leaves across the floor. Water flowed through the pipe behind the wall, a sound that used to annoy Clara, but now she didn't even notice. She lay there and stared at the ceiling. No sleep, no thoughts. Just a white spot before her eyes. And emptiness, like an empty teapot. It still held its shape, but there was no heat in it. A photograph lay next to her pillow, bent like an old man's back. The face in it was not hers. She looked and did not understand who it was. A woman in a white dress with naive eyes. Was this the one who had lived for 10 years without asking questions? Or the one who left the house with a letter and walked without knowing why? Clara got up, unsteadily. Her legs felt like cotton wool. Her body didn't feel like her own. She went into the bathroom and turned on the dim lamp. She looked in the mirror. Her eyes were red. Her face was wrinkled, as if someone had run a knife across it. Her hair was tangled. Her face was unfamiliar. But inside, something suddenly pricked her. It didn't hurt. It was gentle, like a memory. She remembered her mother. How she used to stroke her hair when Clara was a little girl. She would say, "You are strong. Even when you cry, you are strong." Clara didn't believe her then. Now she had simply forgotten how it sounded. She remembered her father. Silent, but with warm hands. How he once brought hay into the house to keep them warm when the stove wasn't working. How he laughed when she first baked bread with salt instead of sugar. She remembered sitting with Thomas on the shore. Before the wedding, he held her hand, silently. But then the silence was cozy, not deafening. It all came back, as if someone had quietly and carefully opened the chest of memories. She went to the kitchen, poured some water, sat down. Looked at the letter, picked it up, read it aloud. For the first time, in her own voice, slowly, without trembling. Not because she wanted to prove anything, but because she wanted to hear herself. Something clicked inside her. Not a discovery. Not an epiphany. Just clarity. As if everything had split apart. The life that had been forced upon her and the one she could have chosen. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the silence. She simply accepted that from now on she would live. Not for someone else, but for herself. For the person she had lost long ago, but who was still calling her. The next day she woke up early, without an alarm clock, without needing to. She just opened her eyes, and there was no pain in them. The fatigue remained, but it had changed. It was like a muscle that hadn't been used for a long time and was now moving again. The sun was shining through the curtains, dim but real. She got up, slowly but confidently. She wiped the mirror. She combed her hair longer than necessary, as if she were remembering herself with her fingers. Then she picked up the broom, not out of obligation, but because the dust no longer seemed normal. Ramiro came down to the kitchen later. "Something's brighter in the house today," he said, pouring himself some coffee. "I decided to be," Clara replied simply. He said nothing, just nodded. And that was enough. She took out the letter. She put it in a drawer, not to hide it, with respect. Like something important that should no longer be left out in the open. After lunch, she went to Sophia's. She entered the kitchen without knocking. Sophia was standing at the stove, covered in flour up to her elbows, frowning but alive. "I want to help," Clara said. "No questions asked. Just be there." Sophia looked at her, long. Then she waved her hand. "Then my dough." I can't reach it. They kneaded the dough in silence, their hands covered in flour, their faces covered in flour. And somewhere between the bowl and the rolling pin, a new breath emerged, as if life had returned to their veins, not for anything, just because you're alive. Later, as they sat on the porch with their tea, Sophia suddenly said, "You know what the hardest thing is?" "What?" "Not forgiving, letting go, not even others, yourself." Clara nodded. "I've lived my whole life as if I had to earn something. Love, attention, patience, and now I want to live as if I've already earned it." Sophia smiled, but there was warmth in her eyes. No pity, just warmth. That evening, Clara wrote a short letter. One line, no accusations, no explanations, just, "I'm alive, and everything will be different." She signed her full name. She sent it. And it wasn't the beginning of a war. It was the end of the silence. They sat at the same table where she had sat silently for so many years. Everything was as it had been before, only she was no longer the same. The house greeted her with sounds she knew by heart, the creak of the steps, the click of the light switch, the grumble of the kettle. Only now it didn't weigh on her. It was foreign, familiar in her memory, but not in essence. Thomas came out of the garden and saw her on the doorstep. He froze. He looked as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Not out of fear, out of confusion. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Don't be afraid." "I'm not here for you," said Clara. He was silent. He let her in. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her, as if for the first time. Lucia sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, knitting. Her eyes flashed, but her voice remained the same. "Do you even understand how you've exposed us?" Clara sat down, calmly. She placed a small box on the table. Inside was a photograph, a letter, and nothing else. "I didn't come here to make excuses, or to ask for anything." "Then what do you want?" "To tell you what I've been keeping inside all this time." She took out the letter, placed it in front of Lucia. "He never told you this. He wouldn't let me say anything." "I kept quiet because I thought it would be better that way. But it didn't make me feel any better. Or you either." Lucia touched the letter. She didn't open it, but her hands were shaking. "It's not my fault you married a poor man." "Neither am I." At that moment, Elena entered. She froze, with her bag, as always, in someone else's coat. "Well, hello, martyr," she said. Clara looked at her calmly. "You were right. I am indeed soft. Only now do I know that softness is not weakness. It's what makes me who I am. And if you didn't see that, it's not my fault." Elena opened her mouth to say something, then she closed it. She smiled crookedly. "Yeah, right. As if you were the only one who suffered here." "That's what I'm saying," said Clara. "We all suffered. Only no one dared to say it." She stood up. She took the letter, put it back in the box. "I'm not looking for forgiveness. And I don't expect you to understand everything. I just wanted the truth to be told. Not for you, for myself." She paused at the door, looked at Thomas. "You could have been different, but you chose to remain silent, and I didn't." He said nothing, but he lowered his head, and that was enough. The kettle on the stove hissed as if telling a story of its own. Clara sat by the window, wearing a scarf and Ramiro's old sweater. He had gone to visit his nephew for a couple of days and left the house to her. "You know better when to water the flowers," he said with a smirk. And it was like a confession. You're not a guest here anymore. On the windowsill was a cup of hot water. No sugar, no tea. Just to hold her hands, to feel the warmth. In the corner lay a box. Inside was a photograph and a letter. But now they no longer burned. They were part of history, not punishment. Outside, the gate creaked. The wind stirred the laundry on the line. A dog ran down the path somewhere. And all of it was alive. Not perfect, not eternal, but alive. Clara stood up. She wiped the table. She took the fresh bread she had baked the day before. She cut it into slices. One for herself, one for the birds outside the window. She just put the third one next to her, because now she had a place. And an extra piece was not a burden. It was an invitation. She didn't expect everything to be forgotten. She didn't expect to be loved. She didn't expect anyone to understand. She just knew, now she existed again. And that was enough. Have you ever felt like no one hears you, even at home? Write the word worthy if this story resonated with you. We read every message, and you are not alone.